welcome to Afflictions Sugarcoated, a podcast where we sugarcoat some of the world's so-called afflictions and rate their plausibility on a scale of 1 to 5. I'm Minnie Kim, and today we'll be sugarcoating and excuse the French here, fin de siècle malaise, or the end of the century anxiety. I guess it's easier to just define what the end of century anxiety is first. Mostly connects to the idiom in English, turn of a century, if that rings a bell. So the historical context of this is pretty simple. It was the late 1800s or the early 1900s. It refers to the cultural, artistic, and intellectual atmosphere in Europe. Of course, it's Europe only, especially France, Austria, England. And as the 19th century came to a close, a building mood or anxiety came up. And this wasn't just a time marker, it's a mood that we can use constantly, and it was mainly filled with contradictions, as many sources claim. There's the first one, optimism versus anxiety. There were rapid technological developments in place. This included telephones, electricity, psychology, Darwinism, but there was also this growing idea that we would lose our tradition and our religion and our beliefs or social order. That was the belief that social order entirely was falling apart with these new developments. Then there was overstimulation, there was overcrowding. Cities were booming, there was mass media, art, and consumerism taking place, and it people were essentially dazzled, but they were also mentally worn out. Then there's decadence. Artists like Oscar Wilde, Gustav Klimt, I hope that pronounced right, and writers like Baudelaire and Huysman, reflecting a craving for beauty, luxury, and meaning, but even with a layer of boredom and disgust that was revealed in a lot of their art and a lot of their literature. Then the final one was nihilism and uncertainty. Many people felt civilization was reaching its absolute peak or heading towards collapse. If this was the very, very top, then surely we couldn't stay at top. No one stays at the top forever. There had to be a drop. And of course, World War I was just around the corner. And this era essentially gave birth to what's called the decadent movement, symbolism, and the first stirrings of modernism. It was a world caught between nostalgia, the past, being skeptical of the future. It's best explained by Max Nordau's Degeneration, that explained that two dominant traits of those degenerated in a society involved egomania and mysticism. You can take whatever you can from there, you being egotistic, being mystical. Mysticism, I believe, was more about the future than the present. And I think another quote by Oscar Wilde, a very famous one, I think: the optimist sees the donut, the pessimist sees the whole. So this raises the question of, did this sentiment end up happening? Did this prediction, we could say, end up happening? Well, I think it's very much arguable that it did. The first evidence being a cultural and spiritual crisis that eventually contributed in some way to the world wars. There was a sense of civilizational exhaustion, there was cultural decadence, as mentioned before, and meaninglessness. This definitely foreshadowed the total collapse of Europe's old order when World War I happened in 1914 to 1918. And to make it worse, World War II happened as well. Then we have the artists who once played with despair and decadence, like the symbolists and decadents, that gave way to more aggressive modernist movements after World War I. Dada, which I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce, surrealism, existentialism, all of these ideas were developed beforehand, but it came to a boom when World War I happened, or before World War I happened, when there was some prediction that we had reached the peak and there was no way of climbing back up. This directly reflected the trauma of war and disillusionment with old ideals. Then we have the rise of nihilism and loss of faith. this sentiment called the death of God and the decline of traditional values anticipated by Nietzsche and others became more pronounced in the 20th century. This was particularly post World War II, which I guess connects back to this idea of whether this can happen in other centuries as well. It was mainly founded in the 19th century. Then we have existentialist thinkers like Sartre, that's with a French accent, and Camus in the mid 1900s, explicitly exploring life without objective meaning, echoing the themes of this nihilism introduced with this idea of end of a century. This makes us wonder, what is it about a century? I remember talking about the number 100 in another episode called 100%. This idea of fulfillment when we reach 100. Not 10, not 1, not 1,000, but 100. It's probably because of our obsession with 100%, but that's an idea for another time. Then we thirdly have art as rebellion or escape. This idea of art for art's sake continued. It was seen in almost everything from modernism to today's internet aesthetics. It's literally everywhere, even right now. If you scroll through a good amount of TikTok, you will find art for art's sake, simply because it's beautiful to look at, which I don't think there's nothing wrong with. The emphasis of personal expression, irony, and beauty as resistance lived on in fashion, film, subcultures. And now we're bringing us back to 1999 when there was the Y2K panic. Computers were expected to fail at midnight on January 1st, 2000 due to two-digit date formatting 99 to 00. People feared power grid collapses, bank failures, or even nuclear meltdowns. This obviously didn't end up happening, but the same effect essentially was shown in 1999. And like the 1890s, the 1900s was a moment of technological uncertainty. There was fear of collapse from overcomplex systems, this question of should we develop technology more if there's always this risk? Clearly, we've gotten way far bit what we were in 2000s. Then we have the cultural and social malaise. The economy was essentially booming, but many felt disconnected or alienated. This obviously foreshadowed the 2008 housing crisis. There was a suburban sprawl, internet isolation, and hyperconsumption that led to a sense of emptiness beneath the surface of all we had done. Then there were introductions to movies like Fight Club, The Matrix, American Beauty, all produced and released in 1999. They all screamed, the world is fake. It is almost a simulation, one could say. I'm suffering. And most of all, is this all there is? This was the type of nihilism that movies can have, and it certainly affected a lot of people. Then we have the sphere of an apocalypse, not just from technology, but also religious cults. For example, the Heaven's Gate in 1997, predictions about the end of days, and even global catastrophe. There was this sense of looming doom, just as there had been in the 1890s when spiritualists and doomsayers flourished, absolutely, because they saw an opportunity and they took it. Then we have rise of individualism and rebellion. People were rejecting mainstream systems through grunge, emo, anti-corporate protests, and early internet subcultures that could only be done with our newfound access to this internet, this scary thing that was now going to change the century to come. Then we had parallels that could be drawn to decadent poets, symbolists, and early modernists who rejected Victorian values and sought deeper, often darker truths that broke all the tradition that we had. And maybe we could argue even that our social order in the 21st century is much, much worse than the social order that we had back then, but then again, that would have been in different standards. We can never make that argument. So I won't comment on whether all of these became true, whether the end of the century syndrome actually surfaced and materialized in real life, but it's a good thing to look at. Now, I'm not saying this for just saying it. All of this is just to say that there is this sentiment almost everywhere you go. It did happen almost everywhere you went in the 1900s or maybe even the 2000s. Everywhere, I think there's this dooming feeling of this end of a century. When it's 2099, I'll be 90 years old, or I hopefully am 90 years old. A lot of people live to 90, that gives me hope. I'll probably have forgotten almost anything here that I've said, that I've done. Maybe I'll be encroached by this disease called Alzheimer's. Maybe there will be a cure to Alzheimer's, or maybe there will be revelations of treatments. All of this is to say that there's this dooming feeling everywhere that we go. And whenever I think about anything ending, I'm reminded, of course, to the BBC Sherlock series, when in the episode where Mary and John gets married, Mrs. Hudson says it was an end of an era. During her own wedding quite some time ago, her and her best friend promised that they would stay friends even after she got married, that nothing could break their friendship. That best friend ended up leaving her wedding early. And at the end of the episode, Sherlock also leaves John and Mary's wedding early. 2 episodes after that, Mary is shot to death, and contrary to many beliefs, I never thought their friendship was the same afterwards. And I think this also seems quite relevant to what's happening today. Politics, which I'll leave probably without comment. People, for some weird reason. The Pope. But for my own experience, seniors. It really is an end of an era for them. This is probably my third summer making these podcasts every month, and obviously there's a different group of seniors graduating every year. And every single time I make a podcast near the end of an academic year, it hits the same and different at the same time. To this day, I'm not quite sure why. The sentiment that they have, I also can't understand until I am a senior myself. It involves a lot of bad judgment calls, at least in my school. It's a sense of freedom, I guess, but it's also a sense of uncertainty. Maybe it's called drinking away your uncertainties. Ironically, this is when we should be making the best judgments of our lives. This is what colleges accept. This is what colleges accept us for. But I guess that's just not true. I haven't seen a lot of pessimists so far out of the seniors that I've met. Just people with an insane amount of either relaxation or an insane amount of regret, or maybe both. So I think we all just aim for that relaxation, but also the everlasting feeling that we are one whole group with multiple eras ending at so many times. There's family loss, new jobs, new schools, new friends, new people, new ages reached or unlocked. If the best way to go about this is to suck it up as people did in 1999, 1899, the centuries before that, then it is pretty hopeless, because it really was what they had to do. Whether the world was indeed ending, or whether this sentiment or mood was too real for people to bear, what more to do than just go on? But I think to end on a more or less optimistic note, or seeing the donut, as Oscar Wilde would say, the quote from Great Gatsby goes, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." I give the sugarcoating of the end of the century mood a 4. This podcast was written and produced by me, Minnie Kim. If you have any comments or reviews, please feel free to write any and all thoughts on your podcast reviews. If you'd like to suggest an affliction for me to sugarcoat, please email me via afflictionsugarcoated@gmail.com. Again, congratulations to all the seniors. I hope college or not, wherever you go, treats you very well. And of course, As always, I pray that life treats us all very well.